Hello YouTube, I thought I'd come on here to try and expose a very unusual cover-up that I've noticed. This is concerning our world's most popular horror story, namely Frankenstein, on time for its 200th anniversary that happened last year. Now you might be wondering, what on earth is the world's most popular horror story doing in the middle of a huge cover-up on its 200th anniversary? And the reasons for that are relatively simple. Initially, two-thirds of the way into the book as I was reading it, I discovered my date of birth clearly encrypted into the text on page 138, chapter 8. This is the first three words of the chapter, where the monster begins to express his rage at the disappointment of a meeting, or failure of a meeting between himself and fellow human beings. And it was a discovery of this encryption that prompted me to realise that I could now use this, as I say, as legal evidence to protect myself against exploitation upon my person by third parties, as has happened to me in the past on numerous occasions. This is following a quite serious car accident I had when I was 14 and sustaining a head injury and sinus cancer that affected the left side of my head for the best part of 25 years, leaving me in a very vulnerable, unhealthy position to be exploited by numerous thugs, third parties, bullies, you name it, that were all parasites lining up to take advantage of my weak disposition. Now, I'm probably not the first person to be able to relate very closely to the circumstances of the monster in this book, but I'm certainly, I believe, the first person to find my date of birth encrypted into the text. And yes, there's possibly hundreds, thousands of people born on the 6th of 667, but I believe only very few of them have been through as many serious accidents and illnesses as I have and managed to come out of the other end alive. So that narrows it down to a very small number of people born on that day who could potentially find this encryption. And it is subtle, let's face it, it is subtle, but at the same time it's also extraordinarily clear. Which is quite ironic, and it's also the wording of the encryption that is of particular interest, because cursed creator behaves like a pointing finger, quite literally pointing the finger of blame at the Dr. Frankenstein, for being the source of misery and evil and darkness, exonerating the monster, who many first assume to be the evil one when they first pick up the book. So yes, this conflict between the Doctor and the monster, and the decision on which one is the evil one is a point that's actually debated and argued throughout this book. As you read it, you notice that there's various arguments to and fro. But Mary Shelley, I believe, has quite clearly answered the question, really, with three words, as I say at the beginning of the chapter there. And at the same time, it also stands to dispel many of the myths and cast aside many of the lies that we've been fed on the whole topic of the 3 sixes, the Antichrist phenomenon, and I'm referring, of course, to the films that we were shown some years ago, the Damien, the Omen, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc., which was all sort of excitable horror fiction. Fed to us by screenwriters that were being paid, obviously, lots of money to, dream up nonsense from a public that were quite keen to watch, large amounts of fictional horror. But the worrying part was a lot of people took away the assumption that what they were watching had an element of truth to it. And a lot of people, I believe, ended up believing the fiction or mistaking it for truth. And indeed, I mean, the whole Catholic religion seemed to have become quite obsessed with the whole 666 Antichrist, equals evil nonsense. And I can see the discovery of the encryption and all the information I've found that potentially, as I said, these discoveries can turn all our assumption, all our beliefs to this point on their heads and literally turn over the apple cart. Which understandably has not been received very well by the powers that be, because as I say, this has now become a victim of a cover-up, and as I started to spread this discovery on the internet and through my network, I quickly received very abrupt responses, if any at all, reminding me basically that this was not a welcome discovery, and the news that I can now defend myself and possibly gain compensation for past abuses, um, and prevent any further abuses in future, as I say, has not been welcomely received. And this comes in the form of, or in my case, came in the form of doctors that initially started telling me that my cancer symptoms were normal. Severe cancer symptoms were apparently normal. A very strange kind of medical terrorism that had me in a headlock for a very long time. And on top of that, then came dentists who started taking advantage of my exasperated tooth decay, intensified by sinus cancer, and running riot with all their experimental procedures, which left me with a very serious and disastrous dental problem, which again matches me pretty much exactly with the monster in the story here in the pages of this book. And as I say, all the circumstances of my life story and my health problems match exactly with the circumstances of the monster in the book. It's not just my date of birth, it's also every detail and circumstance of my 25-year battle with cancer and recovering from head injuries due to car accidents. So I'm probably not, as I say, either the first damaged person to be able to relate to the monster in this book, but I'm certainly the first damaged person to find my date of birth encrypted in the pages. And as I say, I'm now, as I suggest, I'm now armed and dangerous with the information I have here, potentially being able to defend myself in the future and gain compensation for past abuses, and help other people who find themselves in a similar position to the one I was. So it's no great surprise that this has not been welcomely received to date. Now, what we're waiting to see now is whether there's going to be any change in the reaction of authorities and the media to the discovery of this story. Because, as I say, so far they have been reminded that there is no wish at all to print it, no desire to let people know about what's happening here, merely because it stands to turn, I believe, a lot of our established beliefs on their head and upset some people in authority. But I think that's a very weak and bad reason, really, to bury a story like this, which I think, to be perfectly honest, the public would like to hear about, not just from the point of view of just a man being able to defend himself in a courtroom, which is in a sense kind of a bonus or a side effect to what I've discovered, but the actual story itself of a man finding his date of birth encrypted into the world's most popular horror story is a story on its own. that I believe the public would like to hear, and I think that a truth that they would like to be reminded of following all the barrage of bullshit and lies that we've heard on this subject of the 360s to date. So, as I say, I think the public deserve to hear this, and it's quite upsetting in some ways that the story has been buried, and so many determined efforts have been used against me in order to bury it. Explaining my appearance here on YouTube to try and get it out there. So yeah, it remains to be seen actually what their next move is going to be. It's not wholly unlikely that I could be assassinated. As I say, a thorn in the side, maybe the biggest thorn in the side to these people at the moment, because it didn't take much research to reveal that this kind of exploitation of the sick and vulnerable is systemic through the criminal justice system. And goes back hundreds if not thousands of years. And if this can potentially bring all this to light, then you can imagine, you know, the real horror for the establishment. And perhaps really perhaps I've just touched upon their raw nerve, you know, because maybe that would explain, you know, all these desperate efforts to try and feed us so much nonsense over the subject of 360s. The repeating of so much nonsense, you know, on that topic. You know, what were they afraid of? You know, it does really suggest that they were potentially worried about something, you know, that could happen on that subject that could humiliate them, if you like. And this could be, you know, exactly it. In fact, I'm in no doubt about that. So yes, you know, could be assassinated. Or these people could come out with their hands up and admit defeat and admit that, you know, I have so much evidence here that it might be best for them to back off. And I say so much evidence because I was so intrigued by the discovery of this encryption that I decided to go and read another book by Mary Shelley entitled The Last Man, or at least go on a journey to do some more research, and looking for answers to the questions that I had popping up in my mind furiously. And these were literally like popcorn popping. I had like questions concerning how the encryption got there, what Mary Shelley was thinking, how conscious was she of somebody finding it later on. And it then came to my attention that it was all entirely conscious and a conscious effort that she did to actually put the 3 words in the beginning of the chapter there for somebody to find later on. And so I was pleasantly surprised to find actually all the answers to the questions that I had comprehensively answered in The Last Man by Mary Shelley. And I shall go into that, I believe, in another video very shortly, because they were extensive and substantial and back up everything that I discovered and was suspicious of in this book, and confirmed it all beyond any doubt. Literally to the point it was completely undeniable. So well done, Mary Shelley, is all I can say at that point. Continuing the theme of just extraordinary discoveries, and that is extraordinary occurrences, and that is that what started as a work of fiction, what started as a few scribblings in the back of a notebook for Mary Shelley 200 years ago, printed into a book, a fictitious horror story, has now ended up as a stark reality. If you examine all the circumstances of my life and the circumstances of the monster in the book, you can match them quite literally like for like hundreds of dots that join up from 2 layers overlapped. Everything matches up exactly, to the point where it's truly mind-blowing that such a work of apparent fiction should end up as a very real, undeniable reality. And I cannot think of any other instance where anyone can point to a case of that happening, or point to a book, more specifically, where that's happened. Point to a book of a work of fiction and say, "Hey, look, this quite clearly started off as fiction, and now look, it's a reality." And I'm talking about, even my dental destruction to the horror I've suffered in courtrooms at the hands of unscrupulous thugs and police, for that matter, which drew to my attention that one, there was very little I could do to defend myself, and two, this was a systemic problem through the criminal justice system, and three, I mean, it could go back hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So what I'm touching upon here is clearly a very raw nerve. As far as putting things right and reminding us of the truth, and reminding us that maybe the rampant exploitation of of sick people just because they look ill is no longer acceptable. Again, very unwelcome news, apparently. Oh dear. So, right, well, on that note, I better go now, and well, thank you very much for watching, and encourage you to please leave any comments or suggestions that you have to either good or bad. Suggestions, as I say, to try and get the word out there, try and get the truth out there, try and overcome all these efforts that I've come up against to bury this story and bury myself. And any similar experiences you might be able to share with me that could help me make some progress, or enlighten me at all, that would be fantastic. And thank you again for watching.